This is part two of my conversation with my friend Sam Middleton, who knows more about selling and buying ranches than anybody in the world. You sold the 4.6s.
Yes, sir.
And tell us about that.
Well, I was very honored to get to do that. It was the 4.6s ranch was owned by Ann Marion, and she's a lady I had done quite a lot of business with for about 40 years. And I had sold several ranches for her, and I sold one ranch to her and did a lot of appraisal work for her. But I had a very good relationship with her, and I can remember before she passed away, she told me that she said, "When I pass away, there's instructions that I want you to handle the sale of the 4.6s," which actually were three separate ranches. You've got the 4.6s there at Guthrie that was 142,000 acres. And then up at Borger, she had the Dixon Creek Ranch that was 114,000 acres. And then at Sherman County, she had the Frisco Creek Ranch that was a pretty big circle irrigated farm and ranch operation, pretty intensive type deal. It was only about 9,600 acres, but they could run a lot of cattle on it because a lot of it was under irrigation. But she told me, she said, "I want you to sell all three ranches to one person." And I told her I'd try to honor that. And so after she passed away, I went to the funeral, and her trustee, he and I talked, and he said, "I'll be getting in touch with you." And a few weeks later, he called me and he said, "All right, start getting things ready." And he said, "We want to try to sell this in one sale." And so I put together a package and everything on that, and had a lot of interest because of the history of the 4.6s. And I had a lot of people that wanted to buy that Sherman County deal because it was very productive with all the irrigation and everything. And then I had a fair amount of people that wanted to buy Dixon Creek, but I was not getting any interest in the 4.6s. And I think it's because it's so highly improved, and that big horse operation there, uh, it's probably the largest horse operation in the world there at 4.6s range. And so there's a lot of overhead involved in that operation. And then fortunately, Taylor Sheridan came along, and he was filming some movies, and they were doing some filming out there at the 4.6s ranch, and he heard it was for sale. And he had a broker who I was happy to work with named Don Bell. And Don contacted me, and so we started in on the process. And Taylor brought in some partners to help him with the deal, but we got it put together, and they bought all three ranches. And I think Taylor's done very well with that, with all the movies he's doing now and everything. So it went to the right person.
It was the big movie producer, and everybody watches Yellowstone and all the things that he produces, and he's a good producer. And that you take the history of the 4.6s, there's the story that the reason that the 4.6s named the 4.6s, a guy won it in a poker match with 4.6s. I don't think that's true, but that's the story that's out there.
It sounds good, doesn't it?
It does sound good.
The truth is, Burt Burnett, when he was a young man and just getting started in the cattle business, he bought a set of cows around Denton, Texas, that had the 4.6s brand. And uh, and so that's where the name really came from, was the first set of cows he bought. But the the story was that he won it in a poker game with a hand of 4.6s, and that sounds good, but that's not the truth.
Yeah, it was the story was that there was a guy had three aces and two kings, and he bet his ranch, and that The other fella had 4.6s, and that's how he got it. But I think that's probably not correct. This Denton cattle
I'm told that
calf,
it's not.
yeah, calf story is. But 4.6 is an impressive operation, and I was down there. Ann was a friend, and was down there when I was a state senator, and looked around and everything, and it's a big operation, big
Yes,
time.
sir. Yes, sir.
And there'll be all kinds of 4.6s. The I think the Ford pickup that they have, a King Ranch pickup.
Yes, sir.
I fully expect someday Taylor Sheridan will have a 4.6s pickup.
They're really doing a lot to market that brand right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's not going to be a 4.6s pickup. But they've got the 4.6s restaurant now in the Wynn Hotel there in Las Vegas, and they're doing different things to brand the 4.6s. And they're selling a lot of merchandise, or bandanas and caps and vests and a lot of things with 4.6s brand.
Yeah, it's a popular deal. Popular deal. Let's talk a little about George Wilson. You helped him buy and sell a lot of ranches, and he was in had his family been in the ranching business, or did he just get in? And if he did, how did he get in?
I'm not sure. His father was probably in the ranching business, but George was a large operator, and he was the old school cattleman. He owned he did a lot of trading around, buying and selling ranches, and I was fortunate to do a lot of business with him. But I can always remember he would have at least 150,000 acres of land that he owned scattered around. And he was the old school that if that 150,000 acres would run 3,000 cows, typically he would have 4,000 cows. He was always stocked to the maximum, and he
Grazed
had
it to the ground.
grazed it to the ground, and he had several cattle trucks, and he was always chasing a rain. If he had a ranch that was 50 miles to the east and they got a 2-inch rain, well, he would load up a bunch of cows from his other ranch and move them over to that ranch because it just got a 2-inch rain, and then it'd get dry and he'd move the cows somewhere. He was always moving cows around chasing the rain.
The bull drivers made a lot of money off of him.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I remember one time I was with him on a ranch up in Oklahoma Panhandle that he was going to sell, and George was probably in his early 80s at that time, and he had a brand new King Ranch pickup truck, and and his wife, she was in the back seat. Yolanda was her name, and it was March, and it was a pretty frigid day that day. We were driving around, and I looked to the left. I looked over at George, and I saw flames coming up the side of his pickup truck there. And this is a brand new King Ranch pickup truck. And yelled at him. I said, "George, this pickup's on fire." And he looked, and flames were coming up the side, and so he stopped the car, turned the engine off, but it's still burning. And so we all bailed out. Yolanda went out the back door, and I went out my side, and George jumped through the flames as fast as an 82-year-old man could go. He went through that side, and it kind of singed his ears and kind of burned his eyebrows and made his shirt kind of crispy, like it's been ironed too hot, and we noticed we jumped out without our jackets, and it was pretty cold. And he said, "Sam, my grandfather's 45 pistol is under the front seat of that pickup truck." Oh God! So I went back in. I went in on the passenger side, and I was scared to death that thing was going to explode, because it was flaming up on the passenger side, and I pulled that gun out of the below the seat, and we were standing over there. We were probably 100 feet from that pickup truck, and I mean, about 20 seconds after I'd gotten out of there, that thing exploded, just like on TV, and it started burning. And fortunately, there we weren't concerned about starting a grass fire because he had that ranch grazed off so short. there
Wasn't
was
any grass to burn.
no grass to burn. So it burned right there where the pickup was, and that was it. Anyway, but I ended up selling that ranch for George.
Now, he bought a ranch down at Salt Flats,
Yes, sir.
east of El Paso.
Yes, sir.
And did you sell him that ranch?
No. He called me one day and he said, Sam, I bought this old ranch, part of the figure two down here. And he said, I paid $28 an acre for the ranch. This was probably 30 years ago. Said paid $28 an acre for the ranch. And he said, I put 800 cows on it. That's a cow to 200 acres. And it hadn't rained. And he said, I started selling off cows. And he said, I'm down to 80 cows on 160,000 acres. And I want to list it with you. And he listed it with me. I think it was at $45 an acre. And I showed it and finally got an offer of $39 an acre on the place. And he wouldn't take it. And my listing ran out. And about a year went by, and he called me and he said, Sam, I sold that ranch down at Salt Flat. And he said, I'm going to need to find something else for tax-free exchange. And I said, well, George, what'd you get? What kind of price? And he said, oh, I got $180 an acre for the ranch. And I said, what? I said, it must have rained a lot. And he said, no, really, it looks worse than it did when you had it for sale. And I said, well, who would pay that kind of price? He said, I don't know who this guy is, but it's a guy named Jeff Bezos. And he said, I never met the guy, but he bought it and paid $180 an acre. Well, that's Amazon, and that's where the spaceships are located on that ranch now. So you never know what somebody's thinking.
George made a lot of money on that one. He was down to 80 cows on 160,000 acres.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's 20,000, an acre,
Yes.
or is that right?
That's 2,000 acres to a cow.
2,000 acres to a cow. The cow will walk to death going from one piece of grass to the next. Wouldn't have a chance.
No.
That's hilarious.
Yes, sir.
Jeff Bezos bought a ranch. And it's probably still hadn't rained down there.
No, it's pretty tough old country. But that land down there now, it'll bring, I guess, $700,000-800,000 an acre now. It's just because it's got big whitetail on it and awdads, and some of that country has the bighorn sheep on it, and so the market's changed to recreation now.
Well, and that's as you get close to the cities, a traditional ranch. There are very few, if any, within 100 miles of Dallas or Houston or San Antonio, Austin, because they bought them and split them up, and they've got their recreational ranches.
And that market, all along that I-35 corridor through there, that market has just exploded with those prices in there. It's unbelievable, the appreciation that part of Texas has had.
Sam, what's the toughest deal that you can remember that you ever went through?
The toughest deal I ever had, and I love the guy, but selling Boone Pickens ranch because of all those improvements on that ranch. that was a really hard deal to do. And one of the problems in that, and I did 28 ranch deals with Boone over the years. We were good friends, and he sold a lot of country and made money on it. He'd buy a ranch and fix it up, and I'd resell it for him. So we did a lot of business together, and I helped him put that Mesa Vista Ranch together, and it was a lot of fun dealing with Boone. But when he got in bad health, his trustees encouraged him to sell the ranch, and he did not want to sell it, but he knew that it needed to be sold. It was time to sell it, but so he listed it with me, and I brought in another real estate company to help me on the deal, Hall and Hall, because I knew it'd be a difficult sale, and we worked it together on a co-exclusive. But Boone was a very reluctant seller, and and we we just couldn't get it done, but we finally got it done after he passed away.
You know, Boone always tried to get that last dollar, but he had a neighbor one time, a lady there that neighbored him that
Oh, yeah.
got the last dollar. Tell us that story.
Yeah. When he was expanding the ranch, he hired me to try to put those deals together for him, which I was very honored to do that. So there was a lady that had 15,000 acres that joined him on the west. Her name
He
was
wanted to
Fran.
get everything that had joined him to
Right.
make it a big ranch.
Yes, sir. And she was right there on the Canadian River, joining him on the west. Her name was Fran Morrison. She lived in Pampa. And so he told me, he said, go get that ranch bought. So I called her and told her that Boone had asked me to come see her. And she knew Boone personally. And she was in her 70s. And she said, yeah, I'll be happy to visit with you. So I put together a map of Boone's ranch and a map of her ranch, and I had 6 or 7 sales scattered around the area there. And at that time, all of that country, this was many years ago, but at that time, all that country had been selling for 250 to 350 an acre. And Boone told me, he said, you offer her $400 an acre for her 15,000 acres. So I uh, went up there to Pampa, met with her, and we rolled out the map on her dining room table. And I told her, I said, Boone uh, has asked me to offer you $400 an acre. And I said, here's these sales around here, and everything's brought 250 to 350 an acre. She said, there's just one thing wrong with your map. She said, my ranch joins Boone and these other properties don't. And so tell Boone it's $600 an acre. So I go back to Lubbock and I call Boone. He says, get back up there, call her, tell her I'll raise the price to $450 an acre. So I, I call her and she said, yeah, come on back up here. So I come back and I said, this is your lucky day. Boone's raised his offer to $450 an acre. And she said, Sam, she said, you know, when you called me that you were coming back up here, she said, I had a dream last night. And I dreamed that Boone paid me $1,200 an acre for my ranch, and dreams always come true. So you tell Boone the new price is $1,200 an acre. So I left, I went back and I called Boone. I said, well, we might as well forget about her. And I said, she's going the wrong direction. And I told him about the dream. And and he said, get back up there. She priced it at $600 an acre 3 days ago. Tell her I'll give her $600 an acre. So I called her, went back up there, told her he'd give her $600 an acre. She said, Sam, we're getting awful close. She said, tell Boone today I'll take $700 an acre, but there's no sense in you going back to Lubbock. if he doesn't trade with me today, it's going back to $1,200. You just call him right now. So I called him. He said, all right, draw the contract. So he paid her $700 an acre. Started out at 6, and he ended up giving her $700 an acre. And she would call me, and we became pretty good friends. And about twice a year, she would call me and she'd say, how are you doing, Sam? And I said, oh, fine, doing good. And she said, I'm just a simple country woman from Pampa, Texas, but I out traded Boone Pickens. And I said, yeah, you did. And she had a good laugh. She died a few years ago, but anyway, she had a good time telling that she had out traded Boone Pickens.
Well, I mean, she's dealing with a guy that had bought Gulf Oil and the
Yeah,
bid on Conoco and I mean, all the different oil companies and
corporate raider.
yeah, corporate raider and everything. But he had a ranch lady next door to him that was tough as nails and didn't give in.
Right, right.
Well, I always enjoyed Boone. We were on a board of regents together back in 1972. So we go way back, and I always enjoyed him. I went to his funeral,
Yeah, I was there
and,
too.
and you had to have a ticket.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And there are a bunch of us talking out afterwards, Alan White and some
Yeah.
others, and Jim Sowell, and Alan said, Boone, there's nothing he would like better than knowing that you had to have a ticket to get in his funeral. And I said, no, there is. And they said, what's that? I said, Boone would have been a lot happier if it had been people outside scalping tickets, trying to get
Yeah,
in.
right.
And they
You're
all
right.
laughed and they said he would have been
Yeah.
happier with
No,
that.
he was he was one of my dearest friends. I loved the guy, and it was sad because he was such a go-getter all his life and totally consumed with business. And when he got in bad health and he was having eye problems, he couldn't see, and he was having some dementia issues, and it was a painful to see him going downhill because he didn't want to give up. He was trying so hard. And I remember one day I was with him and he was, kind of getting in bad health. And he was talking to this young man and he was very animated. And he was saying, he was going like this. And he said, now, son, I've been married 4 times. And I said, Boone, you've been married 5 times. And, and he looked and he thought and he rolled his eyes and he said, Sam, one of those was a throwaway.
That's Boone. That's
Yeah.
great. Are there any other stories that you've left out that come to mind that would be a big winner?
Well, one of the stories you know, I don't know why it's happened this way, but in the last 4 or 5 years, it seemed like there's been more fraudulent guys come to me wanting to put on the act of big money, wanting to buy big ranches, and they don't have any money. And I don't know what they get out of that. But I've probably had 20 different people come to me over the years, just like young Jeremy, that just a total waste of time. Uh, I remember one of them back when I had the 4.6s for sale. There was this guy that he kept telling me he had all this money, and we'd check him out, and it wasn't true. And but you couldn't upset him. A lot of these fraudsters, you just can't get rid of them. And he kept coming back. I want to buy the 4.6s ranch. And I said, David, nothing you've told me has been the truth. And every time you told me about some asset you have, we've checked into it and it's not true. And so one day I was out there at the 4.6's horse barn with the trustee that I was working with to sell the ranch. And we were sitting in my car and this David called. Sam, I'm telling you, I want to buy the 460. And I said, David, I'm not going to waste my time with you. And he said, well, I'm going to show you something to prove to you that I've got a lot of money. You just sit back and I'm going to send you something I'm going to text you something. So in about 30 seconds, I get this text and I look at it, and it's this video of this big, black, beautiful jet helicopter. And it's just showing this video of just painting this helicopter. It's a beautiful helicopter. And so my trustee's sitting there, and Ann Marion, she had her own security company. And so this trustee says, Sam, give me the tail number on that helicopter and give me this guy's phone number. I'm going to call the head of security. So I give him this guy's phone number and I give him the tail number on this helicopter. And he calls his head of security. 10 minutes later, the security man calls us back and he's laughing. And he said, well, I'll tell you, the helicopter, that stock video of Jeffrey Epstein's estate, they're liquidating all of his assets to pay those girls. And that's Jeffrey Epstein's helicopter. And anybody can download that video. So it's not this guy's helicopter. And he said the phone number goes to a $30 burner phone that you can buy at Walmart. And we've checked calls, and most of his phone calls go to adult dating sites. So, but why these guys waste your time when they can't perform? But there's a lot of people out there that do that.
Well, not only they waste your time, they waste their time. But
Yeah.
they want somebody to think that they're a big dog.
It's an ego trip. That's all
It's an ego trip. Now, I tell you, an old guy that I did the eulogy at his funeral not long ago was a guy named Autry Stevens.
Oh yeah.
Down in Middleton, and
Yeah.
that he sold his company Endeavor for $26 billion, not million, but billion.
Yeah, sure.
And he was a guy that was a low key. He flew Southwest Airlines.
Oh,
They
yeah.
had a Wildcatters convention in San Francisco, and everybody out there had a Gulfstream
Oh, yeah.
or something comparable. And they started a meeting, and about 30 minutes late, Autry Stevens came in. And they said, where you been? He said, my layover in Phoenix was late. And they said, what? And he said, my Southwest flight into Phoenix was running late, and that's the reason I'm late. And they all kind of looked at it. He was richer than anybody in the room, but they'd spent their money on airplanes, and he wasn't about to spend it on an airplane.
Right.
Right. He was originally from De Leon, Texas. He played football in high school with Ben Barnes, and he was a running back, and Ben Barnes was an end, and they played in the same high school. But for high school, had less than 60 people in the graduating class. One of them became lieutenant governor, and the other one became one of the richest oil men in the world.
Yeah.
And but he was a great guy, great guy. In closing, Sam, your book is that a copy? You got a copy there in front of you?
No, I don't. No.
We'll get one. We'll show it. The book Swapping Dirt is a great book,
Thank you.
and I would advise you to buy it and read 2 or 3 chapters a night. It'll give you something else to think about and let your worries be set aside. And Swapping Dirt, and it can be ordered through the Texas Tech Ranching Heritage Center.
Yeah, all the proceeds go to the Ranching Heritage Center. I'm not making a dime out of it, so it all goes to charity.
Well, and I hope you'll get a copy of the book. You'll really enjoy it. Sam's a great guy and knows more about selling and buying ranches than anybody in America. And he's seen some good deals and he's seen some bad deals. but he's got a story for each one. Sam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. I consider you a good friend. So thank you.
That's true. Tell Trisha I said hello.
I'll do it. Thank you. Bye.